Are you guys ready? You still seems like you are asleep. How many of you are fasting here? So I know how many people have not taken their coffee yet. For those who are not fasting, you have already had your cup of coffee, right? If yes, say yes. No. The coffee was not strong enough? Say yes. Yeah, that's a bit better. Well, welcome again. My name is Zahoro Muhaji, and I'm a CEO for Tanzania Startup Association. By the way, I'm standing and talking. You already know that I'm not used to this, right? Yeah. In technology world, they say there are two things. There's a front end and a back end. And I'm the back end person. That part of website which you don't see. You always see the that's what they call front end. But what makes website work is the back end. So I'm the back end guy. I'm the one just to make sure things work, just almost always behind the scene. But one thing working in innovation has taught me is you cannot predict your tomorrow. And till last night, I was not expecting to be here in front of you. But yeah, here we are. Life of a startup. I'm here. So I'm welcoming you today for a special event, which basically is to launch the report of a baseline study, which was done by ESRF, supported by Kingdom of Netherlands Embassy. For those, a lot of you know each other, realize this ecosystem is so connected. But for those who don't, I just want to mention that we do have special guests from government of Netherlands. We do have ambassador for Tanzania, Dibor. Me? Can you see him? Yeah. And of course, we do have another ambassador, His Excellency. One of the guys, this is one of very few events when you have two different ambassadors for one country. Have you ever been in any such event before? Because I know every country has one ambassador in this country. Each country. But today, we are blessed to have two ambassadors from same country. It was a bit confusing when we were telling people, even when we post the posters, some of our members were like, guys, there's a bit of confusion. You know that phone call you get at past 8 p.m. Like, sorry, are you in a special place to speak? Can you speak? Yeah, I think there's a bit of mistake in your posters for the event because you have posted two ambassadors. I don't think this is going to be correct. But it turns out to be correct. So we have another ambassador from Netherlands Embassy who is responsible for youth works. His name is a bit tricky. I'm going to make you suffer. Try to pronounce it. I'm glad that you know that. And I'm glad I've never broke any protocol, right? Okay, all protocol observed. So we have two ambassadors here, but we also have deputy ambassador, Mr. Jo Bronner, at least I know him. And other guests from the embassy and the Ministry of Netherlands from The Hague. But also we do have our partners with a guest from government of Tanzania. This specifically they are coming from the Ministry of Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industries. It's a new name. This delegation is headed by Honorable Deputy Permanent Secretary, Dr. Herschel, my good friend. Stand up so people can see you. Also with him is the Director of Policy at the Ministry of Industry, Investments in the Industry and Trade, Dr. Alfred Mapunda. Oh, sorry. You said you were not a doctor. But we always use this, you guys are doctors. And of course, other staff from, I know there's a director responsible for SME, Dr. Ishababi. Where are you? Dr. Ishababi. Yeah, there. By the way, she's my colleague. We sit together at board of College of Business Education. Me and her, we are board members. So she's my colleague. I'm very familiar with her. It has always been a pleasure working with her. But also we do have the people who brought us here, ESRIF. One of very reputable research institution in the country, and I'm told across Africa. And I know their delegation, there are many of them, but I know their team leader is Professor Wangwe. Where's Professor Wangwe? Yeah. Good, energetic man. This guy, the first day I met him, the first thing he told me, listen, the first day when I was studying computer used to be big like this room. I could not understand. I could not relate. A computer, big in a room, how? He was not done yet. And he told me he was the first executive director of ESRIF in '94. I was 5 years old. He was already an executive director. Then he hit me again. He retired in 2002. I was still a primary school student. But here it is, very energetic, very progressive, very forward-thinking. I think our country is really blessed to have people with his passion, with his enthusiasm and knowledge to do what he does in our country. And he was the one responsible for our work as a team leader. That's Professor Wangwe. But apart from him, we have guests and partners and stakeholders of startup ecosystem, in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in the country. We have people from other embassies, development partners, people who have recognized the presence of EU, Swiss embassy, and USAID, but also we do have other people from other government institutions. Our director for COSTECH, Dr. Amunzunungu, there you are. Of course, director for ICT Commission. Where is he? You come front. You just got newly appointed, so we need to put the name with the face together. Oh, yeah. So this is the guy, newly appointed. Welcome to the ecosystem.
Thank you very much.
Shut up.
Appreciate it.
Good?
Yeah.
Go take a seat. Yeah. So, and we do have other people from other organizations, private sector organizations, but also startups themselves and people from the innovation hubs. So that's the brief introduction of who are people in the house. So before I go on, please give me 2 minutes, right? I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. So in the interest of time, I would want to take this chance to welcome Director for Policy from the Ministry of Investment, Industry and Trade, Mr. Alfred Mapunda, to give his remarks on behalf of the Ministry. Quick one. Mr. Mapunda.
Honorable Ambassadors, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Minister of Investment, Industry and Trade, representatives from ESRF, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I just want to make a first correction, and I would not like to be punished by my superior by pronouncing wrongly the name of our ministry. So whenever you are referring to our ministry, we know of recent we have a merger of two ministries, just address it as the Ministry of Investment, Industry and Trade. You'll be very safe, otherwise you'll be penalized. Okay, my role is very simple here, it's just to say good morning to you. I know I have my boss here who will be hosting this event in a very special way. But I would like to say we appreciate very much to be associated in this very important event. And we commend the initiative that have been taken by Startup Association to collaborate with the ministry in the process of coming up with a very important input towards the policy process that the ministry is undertaking. You may wish to take note that the ministry now is undertaking a good number of policy review. We have a good number of policies. We have policy on industry, we have policy on trade, and we have policy on SME development. And all those aspects are touched in one way or the other on the startup issues. So we hope that the study that is going to be inaugurated will provide the very necessary input towards the improvement of those policies that which some of them are being formulated, but some of them they've been under review. And we appreciate very much the collaboration of the TSA, and in particular now for the development partner, the Embassy of Kingdom of Netherlands for their support, and we hope that we will continue collaborating to make these things happen in a very positive way. With those few remarks, thank you very much, and welcome to Minister of Industry, Investment, Industry and Trade. Thank you.
So, the good thing about innovation is you learn new thing every day, right? So today, something which I just learned 5 minutes ago is when you are speaking, you have to stand behind the podium. How's it like? Whoa. Politicians do enjoy, eh? Whoa, I can see you all better. But no, not so comfortable. Let me get down here. This is not my thing. If I keep using this, I might turn into a bureaucrat. Anyway, in respect of time, and also in the interest of your time, I would love to take this opportunity to welcome here His Excellency, Ambassador of Netherlands to Tanzania, His Excellency De Boer. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good? Welcome.
Yes.
Wait. Hey, you can...
Perfect.
Wait. You use the podium, right? You're used to this.
I'm used to this.
Yeah.
I'm used to this.
You're
but
used-
I personally think that you're also a front man.
Ah,
You're not only
really?
for the back. Eh?
Really?
No.
Thank you for the remarks.
No.
This one, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one.
One thing I love about COVID has made it cool to do this. Like, back then it was used to be like, you have to greet your elders with handshake. And we youth, we only do this high five. So the chance to do this by COVID, this one good thing came out of COVID. Of course, second to work from home. He has this special mic, so continue.
Thank you very much. Doctor, Hashili Abdallah, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Investment, Industry and Trade, representatives from the government, distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen. Now a test. Habari, sasubuhi? Okay. You see, the level is already going up. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today. I see so many business leaders and they are feeling a really entrepreneurial vibrance, which reminds me back in the 90s where I served as a sales executive in an international trading company in Amsterdam before taking the diplomatic path. My entrepreneurial heart is beating again. Thank you for that. Straight away, when I arrived in Tanzania in August last year, I was moved to see so many young people, and there are a lot in Tanzania, doing great things and taking their future into their own hands, their destiny into their own hands, by starting their own company. Good initiatives are flourishing, but sometimes it's against all odds a little bit. If you hear the stories, then it's impressive what people had to overcome, the hurdles that they had to take. So that's why we're here today. But there are a lot of encouraging signs. Only last week, the Arusha Technical College held its first entrepreneurial week with 120 students pitching their startup ideas for a jury consisting of international business women and men. I had the honor of awarding the best business ideas with a package to start a business. There was, again, so much enthusiasm in the air, so much good ideas. It was impressive and very encouraging. This initiative, this study, comes at a very important time. Learning that the rate of unemployment, and especially youth unemployment in the country, is very high. Government and the already operational businesses can only create half of the jobs that are needed for the new generation. So a lot of people have to do it themselves. But the idea is that they don't do it alone, that we help them, that the circumstances, that the environment is enabling. The good news is that I believe that the youngest generation is a lot more entrepreneurial and ambitious than former generations. So the future is bright, we think. Honorable Deputy Permanent Secretary, the past years the Embassy has been working together with the Tanzania Startup Association to strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem, particularly to support creating a business-friendly environment for startups to flourish and to better attract national and international investments. As a result of this partnership with the Startup Association, a comparative baseline study on establishing a startup policy in Tanzania was conducted. An excellent job done, I must say. And it's providing a menu à la carte. You can choose for yourself on how Tanzania can make use of the best pan-African practices to create a more conducive business environment for startups. From Tunisia to Senegal, they already have their own startup legislation. And from Kenya to South Africa, they are in the process. think of tax reliefs, tax holidays, innovative ways to better attract venture capital, but also streamlining the regulations. A one-stop shop to get all your permits, to get started. I started a business 2 years ago in the Netherlands. The official side of it cost me 1 hour at 11 o'clock at night, and the next day I could inscribe my own company officially. And I got a license, etc. Since then I haven't done a lot with it, but it's there. And it shows you that it's possible. Overnight. And you have all the things ready. Okay. Those things are possible if we want it. Today, also to mark this occasion, the presentation of this important study, we have with us Mr. Tijmen Roosboom. That is how you pronounce it. He's the ambassador for youth, education, and work. Because we see this helix together. You need to combine it. At the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Maybe to explain a little bit about the confusion. I'm a bilateral ambassador, the classic type, but we also have a couple of special ambassadors, roving ambassadors, that are traveling the world. We also have, for instance, an ambassador on water. Well, not surprising maybe, if you know the Netherlands a little bit. Tijmen is one of those great minds that travel the world. Okay. This specially designated ambassador's position was only created 3 years ago. He is emphasizing the importance of youth in our foreign policies. And there is a lot of youth, I already said, and especially in Tanzania. He will have an opportunity later on this morning to present himself and to explain about the importance of this issue and what the experiences are so far. And the most important thing is to put youth at the heart of our economic policies. Well, both of us are eager to hear the findings of the report and the possible choices that Tanzania has in the way forward. Honorable Deputy Secretary, we sincerely believe that this report should not collect dust in the ministry. And I've already spoken to a lot of people that want to do something with it. So we are optimistic about it. But we would like to see the implementation as soon as possible. And your first comments were also very encouraging, I must say. So thanks for that. Launching this study is an essential stage. It's an essential step, but at the same time, only the first step. And it's the beginning of something a lot bigger. And I know it will take time, just like Rome was not built on one day, but every step that we take counts, and it's very important, I think, to start walking and to keep walking. We are committed to further support a participatory process of co-creation of the startup legislation and policies by involving the youth, the entrepreneurs, the investors, the academics, and of course the government to do this job together. Last but not least, I would like to convey my heartfelt appreciation to all stakeholders here who played a part in making this study possible. And we are eagerly looking forward to the next steps we're going to take together with you. Asante sana, and I wish you all a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much.
Sorry. So from now on, I'll be using the podium too. Thank you so much, His Excellency Ambassador Wiebe Debor. I must say, Dutch people have a bit of difficult names, but your name is one of the most easiest I've ever met. Why? I'm a huge football fan. And for those who are like me, know that in Netherlands, there used to be two footballers who are twins. They both go by the name of De Boer. Are you related to them? No. No? Yeah, okay. By the, unfortunately not. Oh, okay. So Frank De Boer and Ronald De Boer. So when you came and you had similar name, it was like, yeah, I'll never forget this name. It's easier. It's catchy. Thank you so much for your lovely speech. And now we're moving with our schedule and our agenda. And now it's the time to see what this report we are trying to launch today entails. So, as we said earlier, that this report is coming to you by partnership between Tanzania Startup Association and the Ministry of Investment, Industries and Trade, with support from government of Netherlands. We wanted to be a little bit fair in establishing the issues around regulatory challenges facing startups in Tanzania. And with that, we decided that it would be very good that we seek a third party, yeah? Somebody neutral, somebody professional, and has experience in conducting this type of research. And that's the reason this, unlike other reports we've launched prior, which also all came in-house from TSA, this one we wanted to seek a total neutral person. And this process was competitive, that meaning that we tendered a public tender. A lot of research institutions apply, but luckily ESRF won. So ESRF are the ones who did this report. And now I'm about to call them on stage so as to give us a brief presentation on their findings and their recommendations from the report. I must say that also this report will be available soon after the launch. Almost all of you will get it on your email, the soft copy, but also it will be on our website. So ESRF team, please welcome on stage to give us the brief presentation on your report. Thank you. Okay. So is Professor Wangwe. Welcome. Okay. So.
Yes, sir. Musa, now you are the young man who knows how to set up these things. Okay. So while Musa, the young man, is setting up these things, let me salute the dignitaries who are here, starting with the two ambassadors. Their names are not very easy. Ambassador De Boer, but also Ambassador Roosboom. And also pay tribute to the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Dr. Abdallah. I met him a month ago in working on another policy proposal, investment policy. So I'm glad to meet him again in this particular forum. It's nice to meet Dr. Not doctor, somebody said not doctor, but in substance he's like doctor. Mr. Mapunda, who I knew over 40 years ago as a student at the University of Dar es Salaam. So he's very familiar. We've been working together most of the time from there on. And all distinguished participants, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to go back to the Netherlands very briefly. When I saw very tall people outside there together, I said, this is not usual. I saw this in the Netherlands. So, so I approached them and said, are you from the Netherlands? Indeed they were. Netherlands has it's one of the countries with the tallest people around. So when you see them tall, that's typical. I'm very appreciative of the opportunity I had to work in the Netherlands for 3 years, where there was a newly established Institute of the United Nations University. It was called Institute for New Technologies. And the director then, one day called me and said, we are looking for an economist from Africa who has done some work on technology development issues. So I said, what next? He said, yes, there's an institute here which has been established and would like to beam Africa implications of new technologies on African development. And I would like to have you on my staff. I had never thought of such a thing. I said, you want me to come for 3 months? It's okay for me. For more than that, I have not set myself up. Then we negotiated. After several weeks, I accepted. So that's how I went to the Netherlands to actually work on the implications of new technologies on Africa's development. So I addressed manufacturing. After 3 years, I produced a book. But what I found is that technology, you cannot take it in isolation. So the book combined issues of technology, issues of industrialization, issues of trade, and issues of management. Management, that is what we have been talking about, entrepreneurship. So it's not a purely technological matter. It also relates to industrialization, it relates to trade, it relates to management. So it's broad. No wonder the participants here come from all those sectors. So now when it comes back to ESRF having its assignment, thank you very much, Zahoro, for trusting us to have this assignment. We are being led in this assignment by Margaret Nzuki, who those days, more than 20 years ago, I was her boss. She's now my boss. She has been directing me on how to do this work. Margaret, where are you? Yes. She's the one driving the process, facilitating the whole process on behalf of ESRF. And we have Martin, Musa Martin, who you just saw setting up issues here. He's the guy who has been coordinating the whole team, which has been working on this. And that team is composed of, in addition to myself, there is Dr. Flora Tibazaro. I don't know whether she's here. There is Dr. Mufunda, who is, has been working with the ESRF, and now she's retired into this job, retired but not tired. We have the lawyer Ayub, who excused himself today he has another commitment. And we have in the team the Foria, who is Professor Foria, who is not here, but is located in South Africa. But he did very good work for us, surveying good practices in several countries in Africa. So that team has worked on this report. So I'm here essentially to present the work which has been done by that team. So I'll do the presentation, but if it comes to responses, explaining issues more deeply, I'll call upon the team members who went in depth into these issues to actually respond. So I'll go straight into the presentation. After the introduction, I will examine the status of startups environment in Tanzania, then address challenges which came up as we were doing the study, and briefly address issues which we saw when we were doing benchmarking, looking at good practices in other countries in Africa, and then I'll end up with the recommendations. Startup is a new firm or entrant with high growth potential based on the perceived potential for growth and innovation. And this distinguishes it from other traditional enterprises which are starting. So this has that particular characteristic which makes it unique as startups. Startups can contribute to Tanzania's industrialization and development, the realization of Vision 2025 and the 5-year development plan. So it's very much within what the country needs to achieve, and we believe startup can actually contribute considerably in this regard. Startups are rooted in innovation. We can underline innovation, addressing the deficiencies of existing products, processes, and services, and creating an entirely new enterprise. So it must fill an important gap in society. And that's where you go beyond innovation and technology into understanding the bigger picture and what gap is actually being filled. So there come issues of trade, industrialization, markets, management, so that you can actually address a gap in society. The main objective of the assignment, The main objective of the assignment is to present key challenges that influence startup business environment in Tanzania and present clear and feasible recommendations for policy and legislative reforms. So identify the status and the challenges in order to make way for the recommendations. I will not go into the details of the specific recommendations, but that's clearly what is all about. The methodology which we followed a methodology of mixed methods. We actually did a lot of work addressing documents which are existing at the moment, but we also made considerable work doing interviews with the various stakeholders in order to get insights about what they were actually facing and the experience they were going through. So we had 3 types of questionnaires. One was addressed to ecosystem actors, The second was addressed to support organizations like innovation sort of organization type of. And the third was the startups themselves. So we sampled from each group so that each group was actually represented. So what we found, much as there is no specific policy and legislation on startups, we found that there are several policies, such as SME policy. Director of SME policy, Dr. Ishababi, is here. She was introduced. Unfortunately, that policy is being revised at its final stages, so maybe this comes at the right time where those final additions can be inserted to make it cope with the requirements of what we are finding here. The National Trade Policy 2003, which is also at the final stages of being revised into a policy for 2022. So maybe it's the right time it can take on board issues raised here. We have the National Economic Empowerment Policy of 2004, which also addresses these issues, although without mentioning specifically the startups. The most important reform is introducing a policy on startups by capitalizing on existing policies and then direct or indirect implications, which have direct and indirect implications on startups. When we went through the policies, none of them have actual implications on the startups, but they don't mention them and they don't actually address some of the peculiarities of startups, as we show. One of the identified gaps is that policies were fragmented and they were silent on startups, although what they say in many places has implications on issues facing startups. The new startup policy will need to recognize the strategic positioning of startups and to harmonize the roles and the policies that have implications on startups. So at least we have a good starting point. We are not starting from zero. We are starting from policies which already have issues, a number of them touching on what startups need, but we need to go a bit the next step to accommodate startups more explicitly. Harmonization has to be institutional coordination of both research institutions and institutions that oversee other aspects of the startup ecosystem, such as capacity building, nurturing startups, creating a conducive environment for startups to actually flourish. We also looked at the legal and regulatory framework, which is relevant for startups. This is one of the key aspects affecting the startup ecosystem. An assessment was made on aspects such as business entry, requirements, cost of starting business, and all those issues which govern the operation of startups. The study found that there are no specific incentives for startups because startups are not defined clearly in the legal and regulatory framework. So it's not possible to give special incentives to startups. So what we see as the challenge here is a legal and institutional reform which will accommodate issues which are relevant to startups. On the intellectual property for startups, there is a need for orderly protection and sharing of proprietary information in the form of intellectual property assets. On this side, we found that IP is not explicit on promoting startups and protecting innovations which come from startups. To create a favorable environment for startup ecosystem, we found there's a need for a specific piece of legislation on startups to give the policy which we are proposing, to give it force of law. We need legislation which takes on board those concerns. The National Research and Development Policy of 2010 was passed, but the Act of 1986 was not amended or modified to accommodate issues provided for in the policy. But even this policy, I understand, it is at some stages of being revised. These policies, by the way, have been in the pipeline for quite some time. I felt like complaining why they're taking so long. But now, in view of what we have found on startups, I believe now it is a blessing in disguise that they have been delayed, because they can now accommodate the issues which we have observed in the case of startups. So thank you for the delay. The startup legislation should recognize the pre-startup stage, issues at the pre-startup, at the nurturing stage, and the development stage. This should clearly come up in the legislation. Institutions established in the startup law should also have the role of facilitating dialogue between regulators and stakeholders. That the regulators should not operate independently, but a dialogue should be the base of the interaction in dealing with the improvements in the ecosystem to support the development of startups. There should be provisions of incentives of startup to support startups for purposes of avoiding conflicting and multiplicity of roles and functions. The startup law should have cross-referencing, if necessary, in order to ensure that there is harmony between the various legislations. Now, if we look at the challenges, we have challenges of relating to scale, operations, R&D, seed as they start, and other challenges. There are challenges related to competition, access, scaling, information, and networks. So there are stakeholders like private sector, partners, environment, government, network, reach, policy issues, and validation of skills. The details of these are indicated in the report. So we addressed challenges the way they were reported to us. Challenges relating to general issues, challenges relating to infrastructure, challenges relating to IP, intellectual property, and challenges relating to ICT, access to infrastructure like real estate, business premises, and so on. So these challenges are elaborated in the report, and I will not dwell too much on those. The issue, when we addressed benchmarking other African countries, quite a number of them were ahead and had experiences which we found were useful in the context of Tanzania here. So 17 countries we found have small business acts. 3 countries have startup acts, very advanced: Tunisia, Senegal, and Kenya. These 17 are shown in orange here. The 3 are shown in blue, one country with a draft startup, that is Mali. So we addressed the regulatory environment in these countries. And each of them we saw the number of regulatory provisions, those which are only basic. Look at the comparative, comprehensive regulatory aspects, comparative comprehensive regulations, the degree of to which the regulatory framework was actually entrenched in each of those countries, and we compared them across the board. Who has what? We showed that in detail, but later we'll summarize, which is, I think, more relevant here, what we found as lessons from these countries which we looked at. So I'm not going to bother into details of tables and so on, because what is important is what we learned from these countries. So before I come to those countries, the key messages. Startup acts have a significant impact on private sector development. This is from the literature, from the interviews, and from the countries which we looked at. But two, the growing number of countries in Africa drafting startup acts will increase the competition for Tanzania. So this is an implication that if Tanzania does not cope, others are moving ahead, and in many ways we will be meeting with them in the market. There's an African continental free trade area coming, various fora like SADC, EAC. So if we don't move, they are going to move, and the competition in Tanzania may find us unaware, unprepared. Tanzania's current regulatory framework is very basic, fragmented and dispersed across individual regulations. Tanzania ranks very low on the ease of doing business. We have shown details in this regard. There are signs that we are coming up, but the rank is still not at the level we'd like it to be. There is an urgent need to upgrade regulations regarding startups and to integrate regulations so that they're not conflicting or duplicating. Okay, we shall come to best practices later, but let me now deal with the policy aspects. As we mentioned, one of the most important and necessary steps in improving the current environment for the startup ecosystem in Tanzania is to reform policies that have impact on the development of startups. And as we have seen, it's not only policies which are specific to startups, but even policies which cut across, because we need the startups to operate in an environment which is friendly to their performance. The most important reform is to introduce a policy on startups by capitalizing on existing policies. The proposed policy on startups has to address the gaps existing in existing policies and in the updated forms of these policies. And as I said, since most of these policies are at the final stages of revision, this is the right time to accommodate the gaps we have seen in the policies which are existing. The new startup policy will need to harmonize the roles in the policies that affect startups. Institutionally, the startup policy will be managed by one ministry. This is Ministry of Investment, Industries and Trade. However, other regulators and other institutions belong to other ministries. And there should be mechanisms for ensuring that there is coordination and harmonization in terms of the institutional arrangement to ensure that that coordination and harmonization is realized. A national intellectual property policy should be designed to ensure orderly protection and sharing of proprietary information in the form of intellectual property assets. That's to protect innovations from being stolen at no benefit. This is well known in the world of technology innovations, that protecting the property rights is a very important aspect in promoting innovations. The legislative reform, a specific piece of legislation needs to be passed on startups. And all through we have indicated in detail which legislations need to be put in place in order to cope with the challenges which have been shown in the report. The legislation will set standards and procedures that must be followed by all stakeholders and give the startup policy and related policies the force of law. The startup legislation should recognize the pre-startup stage, the nurturing stage, and development stage. They should be able to catch up. To be able to be explicit in this regard. And the law should clearly define the startups. What are startups? Because if you don't define them clearly, then there is a challenge of identifying who should benefit from the incentives which are specifically designed for startups. The Tanzania Commission for Science and Technology, the Director General is here and he'll be part of the panel, so we'll hear from him. The Act of 1986 needs to be amended to ensure that there are provisions in the general framework of administration and coordination of the startup ecosystem. That recognition is very important in the law. The new legislation should ensure better coordination of research and development by providing the Commission with the mandate to create a pool of research institutions instead of making them affiliates as the current law permits. For instance, looking at the COSTECH, there is a very important incubation unit. Actually, it has produced quite a number of people who have graduated into working from startups to actual investments. This useful work needs to be multiplied many times. So there may be consideration of hiving it off so that it's a fully fledged institution which can multiply what we are seeing as outputs from this incubation. The new law should recognize research institutions and COSTECH as incubator startups, and in order to, so that incentives can be provided to make them perform better. The legislation should make provision for research institutions to be given adequate financial and technical incentives, and this should be based on performance, because it's easy to say our problem is resources, but there should be a way of linking the provision of resources to performance so that it can be an incentive to perform. The law on startups should have a general provision on the entitlement of tax incentives for startups, and with specific incentives provided under the Finance Act. The advantage of this is every year it will be possible to improve on the provisions of incentives, because the Finance Act comes out every year. The requirement for physical business premises should be relaxed in the case of startups, because not all startups must have business premises. The current practice is for BRELA to ask, where are you located physically? Do you have an office physically? These are questions relevant to traditional firms, but enterprises in the modern setting, these requirements should be relaxed and be more flexible to understand that it's possible even to do wonders from home, and not necessarily from a physically identified office. Application forms should be simplified, and startups and other requirements should be able to be simple, so that registration can be easy. Like the ambassador said, he completed registration within an hour. I think that's what we should be heading towards, because the registration is simply a matter of information that I'm starting business, I'm here. From there on, details of operation can be followed up. But to ask so many questions that we must answer this before I authorize your existence, I think this is negating an opportunity to have these institutions actually start. So it should be regarded as pure information. The rest will be through monitoring and performance. The rest will be known as the enterprise operates. And the closure requirements should be simplified and speeded up, because exit strategy in business is very important to be facilitated. And a study which ESRF did quite a number of years ago showed that one of the challenges in business is the challenges of exiting legally. Otherwise, you force people to just keep quiet and dump the company there without telling you. But in order to promote private enterprise, it should be easy to exit if conditions apply. Building the ecosystem. We have important issues like funding. There's a need to increase financial flows to the ecosystem, including attracting funding from private sector through fiscal incentives, giving incentives to those who actually contribute to startups. It could be possible to have a tax deductible clause so as to convey the message that what we are doing is a good thing for society. Support innovation support organizations should be supported by policy and legislation that recognize the different business models, private sector, government, civil society, social impact. With these entries, to be able to be legal with flexibility, because there are various models which work, and these should be recognized as a way of building the ecosystem. Infrastructure. Policy should increase startups' access to infrastructure, such as property and energy tax. Should recognize this digital infrastructure and access to learning and opportunities, which are important in building up the ecosystem. Support in these areas will be important. Markets. Influence and encourage market. One must be mindful of the market. But the market also can be opportunities, and entry into the market can be facilitated. We have opportunities for public procurement. We have opportunities for opening up markets deliberately. So both from the enterprise level, but also from the government level, I think the role of creating markets is extremely important. Capacity building. There's need to for definitive programs that promote the startup innovation pipeline ideation. So capacity building is should be provided for in this regard. Research and development. Startups should be provided access to research results from relevant institutions like institutions of higher learning, R&D institutions. Those results, the situation as of now, there is a long list of those innovations which have not been commercialized. So making them accessible to startups is one way of ensuring that there is commercialization of these innovations. Intellectual property, as I have already said, this is a very important aspect in encouraging innovation and building the capacity of the ecosystem. Now, from the many countries we looked at, we found good practices which are worth adopting. First is the importance of the participatory approach, where if we learn from that, then TSA and the government of Tanzania should work in close partnership to co-design, co-evaluate of startup legislations and policies. This should be an ongoing way of operating because there is part of the information which TSA has, which government does not have. There is part of information which government has, which TSA does not have. So working closely all through all the stakeholders is extremely important. And I believe that in this regard, TSA being able to be part of the Tanzania National Business Council to contribute from the side of the private sector will ensure that the dialogue goes up to the highest level in the country. Two is create a holistic ecosystem and follow a long-term approach. The interdependence in the system should be recognized, and this has been shown as good practice from other countries, and to have a long-term approach, not to expect results within a few months, because some of the most important results here are long-term. That's why a country has Vision 2025, which was formulated 25 years ago, and it's now in the process of preparing Vision 2050, because if you are looking that far, you cannot expect good results in terms of innovations and actually commercializing to come up quickly in the short term. So this should be embedded as best practices have actually shown. TSA and government must promote coordination and harmonization of policies so that policies don't conflict and legislations don't conflict. Focus holistically on framework conditions beyond startups. That's very important to create an environment for startups, but environment for all enterprises is extremely important for startups actually to flourish. So the focus must be able to go beyond the startups, because startups, even if you give them the best incentives, but in a difficult business environment, it will be difficult for them to actually take off. From good practices, we've also found that clearly defined target beneficiaries is very important, whereby TSA and government should clearly define the target beneficiaries of the legislation and policies based on rules. If you're giving incentives, it should be clear who is targeted by those incentives. Focus on the quality of implementation and monitoring. Ambassador said very clearly from the beginning that the risk of this document and issues being discussed here, being able to not go beyond the shelf. That risk should be addressed right from the beginning through ensuring that quality of implementation and monitoring is put in place. And this is what good practices from other countries have shown, that those who have actually put this in place have implemented in a very encouraging way. Design interventions to include the underserved. This is a good reminder, since we are talking of inclusive development here, sharing the outcomes of growth. Then the underserved regions and populations should be part of the development of the startup ecosystem. To ensure political will and cooperation between government, ministries, and agencies, it's very important to have this understood from very high level. So we are glad that today we are with the Ministry of Investment, in Industries and Trade, because that's the highest level in government dealing with those issues. They are representing the president in this regard. So it's a good starting point. It has shown that actually in other countries this is very positive if the political will is with us. Also, good practices have shown that to follow novel processes in the digital area by adopting the regulatory approaches and tools based on understanding of emerging digital technologies and business models. These are emerging from time to time. So the regulatory framework, the policy framework should be able to accommodate new developments as they come on board. And I think this is an issue which will be taken up as the government and private sector collaborate closely. Then create an enabling legal and regulatory environment in a digital world. That overall TSA and government should create a venture-friendly legal and regulatory environment that supports the creation and the growth of startups in an increasingly digital world. The digital world is growing very fast, so we need to have this in mind. The following elements of an enabling environment should be considered: innovation and firm growth, doing business digitally. Those to be aware that the world is moving very fast. Now, agencies and actors, starting from local government authorities, many of these will be located in some local government. And local governments must be able to be aware to have their organizational structure allow support for startups to grow, along with other SMEs. Currently, the structure is more biased towards collecting revenue, licenses, administration. So that reorientation towards development, supporting enterprise development, supporting startup development, that reorientation is very important to be seen actually in practice, so that these startups can be supported by governments in the localities, because the central government is cannot be expected to reach them all over where they are. Now, COSTECH should have proper registration, support, and monitoring of startups according to the pre-defined criteria. COSTECH has been doing a very good job so far. What it needs is the legal support and to be able to revisit the relationship between them and other institutions, including the possibility of hiving off the incubation unit into a major institutional arrangement to support many startups. SIDO, Small Industry Development Organization, in the early days, in the 70s, it used to play a very important role in providing common facilities for all enterprises, or for a wide range of enterprises, foundries and workshops. But these have not been updated since the 70s. So the question one needs to ask is, what kind of common facilities are now by the startups, so that these common facilities can be provided by an institution like SIDO? So it has to rethink the meaning of common facilities in the context of the 21st century and the needs of startups. Education institutions, we have seen that entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit mindset is extremely important, and this needs to be inbuilt in the education system at all levels, revisiting the curricula, anticipating that out there we'll have startups which require not only the spirit of technology and innovation, but also the spirit of entrepreneurship. In conclusion, startups can contribute to Tanzania's industrialization and development vision 2025, and soon, within a few years, we shall see maybe vision 2050, by accelerating growth and development in a supportive environment. Two, Tanzania establishes current fragmented and dispersed startup regulations and laws, and streamline current processes, as we have been saying all through. Finally, in formulating a new startup policy, Tanzania should simultaneously address the gaps and weaknesses in the current policies and legislation, as we have identified in this report. And as I said, we are lucky, it's a blessing in disguise, that many of these revisions of policies have been delayed. Now is the time actually to incorporate the findings and recommendations which we shall come up with here in the new policies. Again, I thank very much the participants for bearing with this rather long presentation, but I believe it gives a foundation for the discussion which will follow this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Wangwe. Please, can we another round of applause? Okay, thank you for your very insightful, brief presentation. As I said earlier, all of you will get the full report. Brace yourself, it's 200 pages long. If you are not an avid reader, please stay close to my social media handle on Twitter. I'll be breaking it down for you, just in case. I have two important announcements. First, we are also live virtually. Some of our audience is virtually attending this event, 100 of them. So for you who you are listening and watching this event from the comfort of your sitting room, your bed, at office, just know we recognize and we really appreciate. Second announcement that there's still coffee outside and tea. You can just go grab your cup while we continue listening all other agendas to follow. So those were two quick ones. Now following up, I think we need to digest what Professor Wangwe just presented. And to do this, we'll have a panel discussion. We'll have experts, legends, and famous people for this ecosystem discussing a brief overview of what this report is and what it means for ecosystem and what can be the possible good way forward. So with this panel discussion, I would love first to bring on stage our moderator for the panel, none other but Ms. Faraja Kotanyalandu. Please, clap. So yeah, yesterday, Ms. Faraja Kotanyalandu, she's I realize I always call you Miss. Oh, you're Mrs. So Faraja Nyalandu, she's an executive director for Shure Direct, and she's also co-founder for Ndoto Hub, one of a female-only innovation hub in the country. And yesterday, they did launch Shule Direct Kids. So for those of you who don't know, very few of you, by the way, because a lot of people already know what Faraja does. Shule Direct, they do use they create virtual learning content and a platform where students from Tanzania can use to learn and get material for their education. Then yesterday they did launch the Shule Direct Kids, specific for primary school students. I think she'll tell us more about it later. Yeah, and on a panel discussion, we'll also have DG Director General from COSTEC, Dr. Amos Nungu. Please welcome on stage. The second panel discussant will be ID8 co-founder, Ms. Zuena Farah. Please welcome on stage. And the last and the final one, Mr. Salaam Awad, SS Capital. So this guy is the one who has money for the whole of ecosystem. This one. You want money in the startup ecosystem, you look for him. So I'll pass the mic direct to Dada Faraja to continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zahara. It's a great honor to be here with you all today and to be moderating this distinguished panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As I have been introduced, I am Faraja Kotanyalandu, CEO for Shule Direct. As Zahara said, we create digital educational content for primary and secondary school students and teachers, and develop web and mobile platforms to ensure access for the students and teachers and also schools. It's an honor to be here because, as Professor said, we're on the verge of so many reviews in terms of policies, in terms of acts, legislation, but I also know from this discourse we'll also be able to address so many challenges in the startup ecosystem beyond just policies, acts, strategies, and guidelines. Karibuni sana, discussants. We've heard so much from the professor on the report. And as he was talking, I remembered my own experience. When we reached our 3rd birthday as Shule Direct, I was particularly stressed, thinking that I am no longer a startup, while practically I was pretty much a startup. And so I think just to set the tone and clarify, what exactly is a startup? I will start with you, Zuena. Karibu. But please introduce yourself and then you can respond to the question.
Okay, thanks, Faraja. Hello, everyone. My name is Zuana Farah, and I'm the co-founder of Ideate Space, which is basically a community of practice for innovators as well as just entrepreneurs. And it's a community of practice across Africa, actually. It's a virtual platform where we have startups, innovators, and entrepreneurs joining in from West Africa, South Africa. Initially, it started just for East, Central, and Southern Africa. Faraja, your question. Having dealt with more than 300 startups and across the continent, my definition of a startup is going to be as general as it should be. I think there are a lot of variables that would define what a startup is. But to me, as someone that champions ideation or that a startup could start with just an idea, I would say, or I would define a startup as an idea or a product that's looking to get into a market or go to market and test their concept. So that's my definition of a startup.
Thank you, Zuena. And I will turn, on the same note, I would turn to Salaam. Please introduce yourself, but I just wanted to add a bit more of a twist to the question. Is it, when we're defining a startup, is it based on the traction? Is it based on the capital raised within a specific time frame? Is it based on the growth of the company in terms of employees? How exactly do we define a startup?
Thank you, Faraja, and good morning, everyone. My name is Salaam, as you introduced. I'm from SSC Capital, which is, so we work in 4 main areas of business. One is we do strategy advisory. We do investment banking, which covers things such as asset management, M&A, and capital raising. We also in financial services, where we design new financial products for the market. And lastly, we're in the private equity and venture capital space, where last year we launched our own early stage seed capital fund, $5 million. We also run our angel investors network in Tanzania, which we launched 4 years ago. So as a company, we've been involved in excess of $300 million worth of transactions for the past 11 years. So definition of a startup, so there are 2 ways to look at it. So there's a policy perspective of a definition, and there's a working definition of a startup, which would vary from market to market, from player to player. If you're speaking from the investor's perspective, there's a way they will define their startup. That's why today you would see in the past 3 years, someone who's raising $1 million was regarded as raising Series A sort of capital. Today, that is regarded as a pre-seed, which is not a seed stage capital. So for me, I would say, let me just put things into context. From the working definition, today, Tanzania, only 17% of the population is formally banked. Less than 20% covered by insurance. I think we have only 20 oncologists in the country. To address all these challenges, you need new types of businesses which are innovative, disruptive, scalable, that will require high investment for them to scale these solutions. And to me, that's the definition of a startup from the working perspective. From policy perspective, that's when you have to quantify it. And of course, that will come from we as a country, how we want to define it. And you will define that, one, from the stage of a company. In their stages, from which you can decide to put a cap. Beyond that stage, you cease to be a startup. So you can define that by number of years. I can use the definition by Startup Act in Tunisia. I think the study also cited the Tunisian Startup Act, which defines a startup in 3 aspects. One, a company which has a period of up to 8 years, beyond which you cease to be a startup. Secondly, you have to have less than 100 employees, and 2/3 of the shareholders must be co-founders / early stage investors. That will define a startup from the policy perspective, citing from the Tunisian Startup Act. So for Tanzania, we don't have one policy based definition, which I think we are working towards that.
Interesting. Thank you, Salom. And as you may have noted, Zahoro was indeed right. He is the money guy. So we are looking forward to your support in the ecosystem. Just on another note as well, Salaam is on the board of Chile Direct, so it's an honor again to be moderating my board member. Quite honored. Dr. Amos, I do understand as COSTECH, you have worked with a number of innovators, particularly through Makisato, which is also coming up in the next month. And I do understand you have seen a wide range of startups within Makisato from the innovators. How would you define a startup from the perspective of a policymaker? But please introduce yourself first.
Hello, good morning. My name is Amos Nungu, Director General of the Tanzania Commission for Science and Technology, where we host Buni Innovation Hub and DTBI, the incubator. So, Makisato is the national, in Swahili we say it, mashindano ya kitaifa ya sayansi, teknolojia na ubunifu, which is a national competition for science, technology, and innovation. And in that one, yes, we can define it, startup from that angle, but I tried to look up into the internet what is a startup generally, and they say startup refers to a company in the first stages of operations. They went further to say startups are founded by one or more entrepreneurs who want to develop a product or a service for which they believe there is demand. Now, here they introduce the word one or more entrepreneurs. In Makisato, we have innovators, not necessarily entrepreneurs. So in the case of Makisato, we are trying to bring up the innovations all over the country, to bring them to light, and then take a few promising, push them forward to the ecosystem. So in that regard, it goes back to the idea, which of course the innovator, they think they could develop a product or a service out of that. But now that innovator should have the entrepreneurial mind or can work together now with the entrepreneurs to make that service or product go to the market. Yeah, so that come together.
Thank you, Dr. Amos. And indeed, we would find that most of the ecosystem is perhaps maybe has more of those innovators than entrepreneurs. Coming back to you again, Zuena, I've had the privilege of knowing Zuena for a number of years, and I know you have been a startup founder, perhaps of more than one startup, and now you're on the other side, supporting and perhaps being one of the ISOs, but also from the corporate side, working maybe directly or indirectly with startups. So from all of those hats that you're wearing or you've worn in the past, what would you consider to be challenges for startups, but also looking at the environment that they're operating in?
Thanks, Farida. Yeah, so first we'll go to the challenges facing the startup. If we were to pinpoint and talk about startups, I think one of the things that I always say is that we'll be redundant. We've had so many sessions where we talk about the challenges and the hurdles that startups face. If I was talking to a new startup, I'm happy to repeat myself and sound like a broken record. But us as a community, as enablers, as ecosystem champions, we've been talking about this, and I always say the means for dialogue are many, but when does implementation kick in? And one of the things that I always tell Zahora is I commend TSA for this, because this is one huge step forward. This comes now or ties into the whole policy aspect. We've heard a few areas that were touched on, the regulatory, the legal framework, taxation, compliance, and all these unfavorable aspects of the policies that are existent. But the primary thing that I strongly believe in is it all comes down to one thing, and that is classification. A startup is classified like any other business. There is no difference, there is no demarcation between an SME that is post-revenue as opposed to a startup that is bootstrapping and getting into the space. And that is one of the greatest challenges I believe that startups face. I'll give you a scenario where we're mentoring a startup that comes in and goes and registers their company. The shareholding or the share capital, I'm not a legal person, just for disclaimer, or that they claim or that they register the company with is put at such a low value, and this is primarily for the reasons saying that, oh, for the next 2 years that I'm actually looking for funding, I have to provision for taxes. And because of that, that amount that I am registering with is tied into that. Therefore, because I cannot afford paying those provision taxes, therefore I'm not going to value myself as this. It now comes to 2 years down the line when now they have to onboard an investor and they start scrambling and trying to now reevaluate themselves. And I think Salaam is here, who is more of the money person, could touch a little bit on that aspect. So there are various areas that I believe that are challenges. Another one is the fact that innovation or technology, I come from a background of technology startups. Technology is evolving every day, it's evolving every hour. And if we do not sit with regulators and policymakers in the room to update them on what are the ongoings in the space, then that is not going to change in favor of the startups that are looking to innovate. A good example is someone that is in aquaponics. Do they land on the fishery side? Do they land on the agriculture side? What industry or what discipline are they regulated by? You find that someone that is in forestry, there's multifaceted taxation policies from central government all the way to municipalities. And as a startup that is bootstrapping or is trying to push an innovative product into the market, and as a country that is digitizing or going into the whole aspect of digital transformation, it is imperative that we sit down and talk about the changes that need to occur, particularly on the side of if we are to compare ourselves with other ecosystems, this is important. Last thing I want to touch on is that the comparison aspect. We're not all cut from the same cloth. And this is, I do understand that, yes, there are countries that already have startup policies in place, but Kenya's problems are not our problems. Tunisia's problems are not our problems. Therefore, if we do not have this one-on-one with founders that have failed multiple times to air out what are the challenges that we face, if we copy from the books of other policies that are existing or old policies that have been placed for a number of years, then we're not doing the ecosystem any justice. We're not pushing forward the way we want to push forward. Thank you, Faradia.
Thank you, Zoena. It's quite interesting because I think when we are looking at the report and as we are looking at the entire ecosystem, I find that we have to deal with business and tax regulations, which applies for all businesses, so the common ones. And then we also have to deal with industry-based regulations, permits, and licenses. And I think that's very important to capture as a key point also in the report. And I think it's something that can also keep on being discussed as the country is reviewing a number of policies across the industries. So coming back to you, Salaam, we've heard some of the challenges, and I really think that there's, on one side we have startup challenges, but then on the other side we have opportunities that are coming out of these challenges. In your experience, I know you have worked with a number of startups, including ourselves, since when we were a startup. And I can see clearly that as we are projecting forward and as we are having all these discussions, we know there are opportunities, perhaps not necessarily within the startup themselves, but also within the market. Can you just share a bit more of what you see as opportunities in terms of policy improvements, but also in terms of perhaps supporting the startups and enabling them to be more capable in the ecosystem?
Thanks, Faraj. I think I'll put your question into the context of two sideways. One is, first of all, let me touch on finance, access to finance, which I think is one of the major challenges that most of startups face. If any one of you who disagrees, raise your hand. I think access to finance is one of the biggest challenges, not just in Tanzania, but across Africa. Actually, total investments in startups in Africa accounts for less than 1% of all investments in all startups globally. So that tells you where we are as a continent. So it's a growing space, which of course is a good thing because we all have all these initiatives. So from the access to finance, what I see as potential opportunities is, which of course is the another side of the challenges that we have on access to finance is, first of all, there's no lack of money in general in the market. If you look at the stats, last year there was close to $6.3 billion of what we call dry powder. Dry powder in the funding language is the amount of money that has been raised but has not been deployed, meaning there's no enough opportunities to invest this money into these opportunities. And to me, I think the major challenge we have is there's a huge mismatch between these funds and the type of businesses who are looking for these funds. And speaking of Tanzania in particular, majority of startups that are raising money in very small amounts. So you see startups raising, say, from as low as $10,000, 25, 50, 100, 150, probably to $500,000. And you see majority of investments which are coming down to Africa are looking for opportunities which are in the minimum at least of $1 million of a ticket size that you're raising. So as a result, you see this huge mismatch that we fail to tap into these resources. So what can we do, and what sort of opportunities that we see we can tap into as a country, especially in Tanzania? One is, I think we need to build our own local financial resources that we can invest in our local startups, which can be built to a stage where now they can be ready for this international money that's coming down to Africa. And one of those is, of course, is to keep on doing enough work for building local angels. So this is my call to all Tanzanians who in the house and foreigners, of course, let's look into startups as one of the potential, investment opportunities that you can invest in. Everyone wants to invest in, buying lands, buying farms, investing in bonds, investing in stocks, and we don't look at startup as potential opportunity. Of course, the failure rate is high as well, but we can also look into this as a potential opportunity. We set up the Angel Network in 2018. One of the major challenges that we have been facing to date is to transform some of these potential angel investors into real investors to invest into these startups because they're accustomed to traditional businesses which they usually invest in. So if we can tap into such resources, I strongly believe that we can help at least early stage startups to raise these small amounts of money that of course can help them grow to be ready for bigger tickets. The other thing I think which we can also look at is we can leverage on the government funds. And what I mean with this is, I think we all know that we have 10% of the LGA's revenue, which is allocated for youth, women, and the disabled. Unfortunately, these funds are not well managed, I'm sorry to say this, and they're not well structured. So as a result, if you want to promote innovation, if you want to promote modern age startups, you don't provide this type of funding into groups. You have to identify individuals who are entrepreneurs / innovators who can be financed with this type of money. So what we need to do is, I think, instead of trying to raise new money, let's leverage on existing money, restructure, rebalance, and disburse to businesses which of course fall under the category of startups. I tell you for a fact, if we can do a pilot at least for 5 LGAs and just readjust the way we structure these funds, I tell you for a fact in the next 5 years, majority of startups would have raised at least their seed money in Tanzania. And the other thing which we need to work on as well, I think, is the role of corporates. I think there's a lot of resources which we need to tap into the bank's balance sheet. Unfortunately, with all due respect, correct. I think the study didn't go much deeper into the area of alternative finance. Because I think we cannot hold banks captive of funding startups. I think unless we're very unreasonable. Banks will never do that. Banks are not structured, are not designed to finance startups. But banks, we can leverage on banks' balance sheets to provide some sort of products that, of course, can go into startups. One of the things we can do is, because you look at the stats, I think all the bank lending in Tanzania, less than 20% goes to SMEs, and less than 10% goes to agricultural enterprises. But one thing we can do is banks can allocate, say, 10% of their balance sheet and set funds which are outside their balance sheet and start what we call corporate venture capital funds, which are outside the bank's balance sheet, and they can invest into these startups which have different characteristics of other businesses which banks usually finance. Because this business needs long-term capital, which is patient, which is risky. You can lose all your money, and you cannot use people's deposits to do that. That's why for banks to do this, moving forward, in the policy perspective, don't ask banks to finance startups from their balance sheet. Ask banks to allocate a small percentage from their balance sheet to set up funds outside their balance sheet to finance startups, which even if they fail, they won't affect the balance sheet of a bank. Another thing I think which we also need to work on is, I think I don't know, for some reason I think we didn't touch much on the financing for female-founded startups in the study, which is, to me, I think is an area that we need to work on more. Last year, out of $5 billion which were invested in startups in Africa, only 0.7% of this money went to female-only founded startups. And fun enough, in Tanzania, for instance, I think 56 to 60% of all businesses are female-owned. And with that number, and to still have less than 1% of funding, to me, I think is pity. So one of the things which we need to work on is what can we do to ensure that we have specific programs and initiatives that can unlock more funding to female-founded startups. And lastly, on the pipeline, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is even if we unlock all the funding to this market, if we don't have enough investable startups to invest in, that money will always go out and look for startups in other countries. Today, if 85% of all venture capital money goes only to 5 countries in Africa, it's not because they love those 5 countries, it's because those markets attract the money. Money goes to places where it is attracted, and it stays where it is treated well. And if you don't do that, money will never come into this market. So one thing that we need to do is, so this is my message to all hubs managers in the room. Let's see and ask yourselves, what does Y Combinator do that we don't? Today, only 2% of all applicants who are applying for Y Combinator are accepted into the program, only 2%. But ask yourselves, if you get applications of 20 startups coming to your hub, how many of those do you reject and how many of those do you accept? So if we can't have that quality of screening, we can end up having everybody in your hub. By the time they graduate, say in 3 months' time, they're not investor ready. If they're not investor ready, you can have 100 of startups coming to the market every 3 months, and probably only 1 or 2% of these startups are investor ready. So if you have a huge chunk of money and a small pipeline of startups, there'll always be a mismatch between the money that's looking for these startups and the startups which are not ready to attract this money, and Tanzania will always lag behind all markets which have done well. So let's look at some of these programs. Let's do some partnerships. 500 startups. Today, let's look at Y Combinator, for instance, which to me I think it could be one of the case studies. I think it accounts for 4% of all venture money that goes into the US. And 10% of all startups which go through Y Combinator, including our friend Benjamin, have exits, meaning investors can realize the investment at the end of the day. So I don't mean to be any technical, but the idea is if we can develop programs in your hubs that can build strong startups which are investor ready, money will come to Tanzania. I can tell you for a fact. Money is just at the border. Money goes to Kenya. You know, last year, Kenya, I think, received $250 million plus for their startups. Why? Because the market is active, is building enough pipeline of startups which attract more investors' money coming to that market. One thing we can do here, despite doing everything, the policy environment, let's reduce the taxes, do everything. But if we cannot be bleeding enough startups every now and then that can attract more money, we won't see these opportunities coming to Tanzania. So for me, my message is simple. Let's see how can we capacitate all these hubs. The good thing is I saw Joseph here with the Funguo program, which one of the things they're going to do is to empower the hubs managers to be able to build startups which are investable, and more money will come in and more opportunities will be opened. Sorry for a very long explanation, but I just want to put things into context.
No, thank you, actually. Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Who else is today years old that they've learned about dry money? Yeah. Thank you, Balozi. Exactly. And thank you for that lesson. Now, try catch me next time talking about dry money like I'm the finance expert. Thank you so much, Salaam. I think what is really trying to say is about the quality of startups, and I think the pipeline to get them ready, and that's where the hubs, the incubators, and the accelerators come in. But on the same note as well, you spoke about institutions. We know clearly that local government authorities do have special provisions to support youth, to support women, and to support people with special needs, particularly people with disabilities. So there is that allowance for funding at that level, which I really think in the definition of startups that we have discussed, perhaps they can be better equipped to make use of that fund. And on the same note as well, I was just looking at the report around the youth population, the population growth, and I think we really have to capitalize on all these opportunities. Currently, the median age in Africa is 19. The median age in Tanzania is 18. So as we're looking at these policies, as we're looking at these regulations, we have to wear not just the youth lens, but also the gender lens from both perspectives. It could be a young person, but particularly let's also pay attention to a young person who is female. Dr. Amos, he spoke about LGAs, but we also know there's so many institutions across the government, but also know the institutions that are supporting the government also and the private sector. And in your experience, and I would ask a question that is looking at both COSTECH and BUNI, in your experience and looking at the report, how do you think the institutions are positioned in terms of their capacity to be able to actually support the ecosystem and the startups?
One of the laws of the government is putting in place conducive environment. And for the startups, it is the same. So how led the other institutions? When discussing, defining the startup, I said we have BUNI and the DTB at COSTECH. And for us, when we started, an idea came in to BUNI, ideation, and the pre-setup up to 12 weeks. At that time, also, the idea is tested, and then they graduate, or they go back home, or they go to the incubator, the TBI, and then now startup journey start. But then we moved on to say now BUNI be a mother hub, because when we started in 2012, there was only 2 hubs in the country, and then the other hub, Kinu, died, so there was only 1 hub. But now we have more hubs, and more are coming up. So we are trying to kind of assist these hubs to provide the better services to the industry. So I would say, we have we have enough hubs, and they're still coming up. And also we toyed on the idea of, these LGAs having their own innovation hubs. We brought them to COSTECH. I would say it is work in progress. And I think last month Last year, at the end of last year, the ministry invited all, representatives from all the, from all regions in the country. They came to Dodoma, talk to them about innovation and how can they support the innovators from within their locality. Then I think we had a pilot. We visited Kasuru and Kigoma and they went to Mbeya to see how in practical those, the money which Salaam said, how can it support the youth within the locality, the innovators, and with the practical examples, it was a very positive experience that these LGAs, they are willing to, to see how best to use the money for the local community, innovators, which now can be transformed. As I said, the innovators and entrepreneurs, they are the same, but not always. So when we meet them, we are trying to make that distinction that, you have to work together, transform the innovator into an entrepreneur. And that is the role which was done by Boone in the 12 months, the 12 weeks. That ideation, and then we say, yes, you are a good engineer, you are an innovator, but to be, a startup, either you have all-in-one or you have a team. Yeah, so we have the institution, and it is going on, and we have been working close with the ecosystem. For example, TSCA. 3 months ago, COSTECH and the TCRA, we said, innovators or startups, they want resources from the regulatory authorities. And the regulator cannot know who is who. So they said the COSTECH should endorse the researchers and innovators who want resources for up to 3 months testing their products. But we said to reduce the brokers, TCA should also be part of COSTECH in saying that, yeah, this proposal, this innovator, yeah, can have the resources for testing. So, things are moving. The institutional arrangements are in place and ongoing. One thing which I'm noting here is, I think Professor Ngwe mentioned that we have the STI policy draft. It has taken quite so long. So innovation, startup are kind of new terms or new terminologies. So our policies, they were designed by, the environment of that time. For example, we have the ST policy. And then now we are working on the STI policy. So the I was embedded in the technology, but then we wanted to get it out. The startup, we have 3 policies: SMEs, trade, investment. All of them, they're looking at the same thing, but the startup was not, at that time, a terminology which was well known. Yeah, so the government is kind of now trying to catch up so that, it can be inclusive while it is running. That's what I'm saying, work together with the ecosystem in order to have that conducive environment, really conducive. Sometimes it takes learning from the neighbor, learning from the community. Now we have the Funguo project, as mentioned by Salaam, which is also, COSTECH is working with the UNDP. Because at one time when I'm at COSTECH, we received not one, I think 3 times, we received, investors coming to COSTECH saying that, at COSTECH, we know you have DTBI, you have innovators, you have the startups at COSTECH, and you know the other startups in the country. So we wanted to invest, give us 10 with this margin. And you scan around, you found, yes, we have startups, but the money they offer, there's a gap. That's why, we are part of the Funguo project, saying that, we needed to now to, to fill that gap. So I'm bringing you back to Makisatu. Makisatu also is a program which was designed to kind of be inclusive. In addition to identifying those innovations and the technologies all over the country, but each institution is given a task. So you found, LGAs are given a task. Prime Minister's office are given a task. So this Ministry of Industry, Investment and Trade, they have a task, a Steel Commission, and so on. For example, there are innovations which are coming from the universities, but there are those which are coming from not the very formal institutions. So that's why the LGA are supposed now to work together and see how we can find them and bring them to the market. But I think 2 months ago, also we worked with the COSTECH and Steel Commission, trying now to bring, the partners talk about sandboxes. Because yes, Professor Wang were talking about CEDAW and the testing environment. Now and then, people come to COSTECH, the innovators, we send them to CEDAW, to TIRDO, sometimes to Kamatech, because also they have that testing environment. But now we are talking about the sandboxes, that this ecosystem, the innovators, in addition to make a space, but because we have seen, for example, Voda can have a sandbox where the innovator want to test a product. So in addition to going to TCRA for a shortcode, but they can use the Voda network to test their product. So that's what I'm saying. The government is listening and is working with the ecosystem to see how best to move with the need of the environment of today. So, and last is, I think, our president, Honorable Samia Hassan, gave a directive a few months ago that all policies should be revised. So having this study, it is a good input to the review of the policies so that, we are up to speed. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you again, TSA, for the study and ESRF for conducting the study. I think the insights will be quite useful for all the policy reviews going on. I think what you were saying, Doctor, if I heard you correctly, so there's one thing when you're looking at harmonization of policies, but we also have to look at harmonization of these institutions that are supposed to be championing and spearheading a conducive environment for the startups. Of course, you've heard so much from our end, and now I would like to open up the floor. If you have any key issue that you picked up from the report and from the discussants' points of views, you may raise your hand. I hope we'll be able to see everyone across the room. But just on the note as well, as he was mentioning the sandbox, I also remembered NMB, I understand Josina is here, also have a sandbox. And I think it's those vivid examples that we have to showcase, especially from corporates, to have practical tools that startups can make use of. Josina, are you somewhere here? Yes. Oh, okay. She's behind the column. Yes. So in case you want to know more about Sandbox, particularly NMB Sandbox, please get in touch with Josina. Josina, I'll send you my check for this advert. Thank you. Thank you. Any question, input, insight for the report and the perspectives of the discussants? Yes, karibu.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much for the panel discussion. It was live and quite informative. Mine is a minor and small comment. My name is Engineer Ugan Wilson from the Ministry of Investment, Industry and Trade. My main issue on the startups is on survival and growth. I mean, what is wanted in between? Having a startup is one thing, but starting up means you want to go somewhere. So the going ahead is what I'm looking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. And I think it was a key question we were looking at in the beginning when we were trying to define a startup. Was it growth? Was it time from? So I think it keeps on coming back. And I think when you're looking at definitions, it's because when the word startup was coined, it came from Silicon Valley, and that gave us the impression of the Facebooks and the Googles of this world. And somehow we feel like we are a startup, but maybe not a startup. Maybe we're an SME, maybe we're just a trading shop. So it could be anything. But we have to contextualize that definition to be in our context. Any other input? Yes, Karibu. Can you please pass the microphone? And when you take the mic, please introduce yourself and share with us your insight.
Okay, my name is CPA Sandra Chogo. So my question is, due to innovation, some startups still don't have regulations. So I deal a lot with technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, cryptocurrencies. For example, I have a young boy who is studying at the DIT. So he has come up with an innovation in cryptocurrencies, and he doesn't know where to take his innovation to. So my question is, for those startups which still don't have regulation, where do they stand? Thank you.
Would you wish to address your question to a specific discussant?
Dr. Amos.
Thank you. There was another hand raised. I think we'll take both questions before they get responded.
Thank you. I just wanted to commend TSA and ECRF team for the lovely report. I haven't actually taken a look at it, but I will after. My one question when ESRF were doing their presentation was they mentioned a few actors that can support the ecosystem, but one that I didn't see was FCC. And my question maybe is to Salaam is, what are the challenges that FCC is providing or kind of hindering the ecosystem, and what role can they play in terms of supporting the ecosystem as well? Because we see, I'm one of the program managers in the Business Environment and Growth and Innovation program at the EU delegation, and when we're speaking to the innovators, a lot of them mention FCC, not only from the MSSME side, but also innovators as well. So I just want to know what your thoughts are there. Thanks.
Thank you, and good luck reading the report. Now we'll respond to the questions.
CPA Sandra, thank you for the report. For the question. COSTECH mandate is promotion and coordination of STI in the country. So anything else which doesn't have a specific regulator, bring it to COSTECH. That is a simple answer. Like I've said, we have, we can connect to any institution in the country. We can, there are times which we go together with the innovator, sit down with the institution and discuss. There are times in which we give referral letters that we have discussed with this innovator. We see the essence, but we think your institution is a much better place to assist. Yeah, because if there's no regulations yet, our act can take anything innovation related. Nowadays, we say ICT specific, we take it to ICT Commission, but the innovation is cross-cutting. Yeah, so COTEC, I mean, we can't escape that one. So please come with the innovator and we can discuss and see where to go, if to the Ministry of Finance or to BOT. Please. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can add to that question, to what the doctor said. So usually, from an innovation perspective, I think it's easier to go to COSTECH and get that support, which is good, and I'm glad to hear that. But if the innovation is providing a service or a product in certain industry, and that industry is regulated, you one way or the other have to be regulated. So say if you're in the financial sector and you have a product or a solution for the financial market, you have to be regulated by CMSA, give or take. So what needs to happen actually is, I usually have two perspectives on that. One is, if it's a noble new innovation in the market, don't regulate it. I hope you won't try for that. Don't regulate it. Because usually innovations come before regulations. With the moment you start regulating premature innovations, you kill innovation. So for me, I think we need to accept as a country that we need to allow startups to do things. One, they need to innovate, and two, we need to allow them to fail. If you can allow those two things to happen, then startups can do much better. And then, of course, at the end of the day, as they get the market traction, we can put them under regulatory sandboxes, which are sort of regulations under watch by the regulator. Then we can set the regulations. Otherwise, if you want to regulate everything, if you want to put a policy for everything, I tell you for a fact, we won't innovate and we will kill innovations in this country. Secondly, on the FCC. So FCC, according to the Act, they have this thing they call major notification, where if a transaction that happens between two parties, so technically it was supposed to be a merger, where when two parties combine, if there's a majority acquisition of a stake in another company, that of course will trigger off a major notification. Unfortunately, from FCC perspective, even if it's a minority acquisition, you'd still need to do a major notification to FCC. As long as that transaction has reached a threshold of $1.5 million. So the challenge comes, if the transaction is that worthy, you have to go through FCC. So FCC, two things. One, there could be delays. Secondly, there are fees you have to pay, which of course adds on in the cost of doing business in Tanzania's market. So what we need to do, that's why you hear that people talking about that all the time, because all these transactions which are coming down to this market, they have to go through FCC. So investors do one thing. One is, you have to invest in a company as a convertible note instead of equity until when FCC approves that transaction, then we will convert that debt into equity, which of course is another cost. But secondly, we need to increase the threshold. What Kenya did, they increased the threshold to $10 million of a minimum of a threshold for you to go to KCC to get the major notification. So that's one thing we need to do at Tanzania. I think it should be part of the recommendations for the policy. And this is one of the things I think Professor said, that these are some of the things that we need other policies to be amended to accommodate the startup policy. So we need to increase the threshold to allow all these transactions below, say, $10 million to not necessarily go to FCC, so we can do these transactions quicker, cheaper, and we can allow Tanzania to be a good investment destination for all this capital coming down to Africa.
Hey, Faraja and your team, sorry to intervene. Guys, I'm at the back. Hey, I'm back on the back end. I used to say that I was on the front end, now I'm a back end. Okay, my reason to quickly intervene is, as I said, we're also live and virtually, and the discussions are really hot online. So I'm just want to read a few comments and also from our audience who are attending virtually, but also there are some questions which they've been asked virtually, so for our panelists, you'll have to respond to a few of them. So I'll be reading down here. You can hear me, right? There's a question from Richard. Question, the report presentation mentioned tax breaks or relief for startups in their early stages. What steps will be needed to make this a reality in Tanzania? I don't know who will have to take that. Maybe DG Nungu. Another question from Ian Usiri. For the investor panelist, which markets in TZ are big enough, in Tanzania I mean, are big enough to be venture investable? So this, I think, is the question to Mr. Salaam, asking which markets are big enough for venture capitalists to invest on. There's this general comment. That's one. Someone, Richard Imasi is saying, just a general comment, too many authorities that takes money to startups, e.g. ushuru wa halmashauri, TRA, fire, TBS, bwana afya, etc. Hey, these guys are taking your money. This is another comment. This is a great step towards building a vibrant local technology and startup ecosystem in Tanzania, but it won't be practical to expect that we can address all possible startup challenges directly through policies. However, we can have policies in place that recognize and promote the role of startup support organizations, stakeholders, and invest and support this. Someone, Frank Mwandi, interesting. He says, my humble request to Dr. Nungu to have one day to meet with startups founders in weekly or monthly basis. I think this is something, it's a request. I think this is something you're already doing, but I think you can commit more time. Lastly, someone is asking on virtually, Fad Abdallah, can I get access to the document? Yes, you will get the access shortly. Please leave your email address on the comments. Okay, so those were two questions for Mr. Salaam. Which markets, or let's say sectors, which are big enough to invest on in Tanzania? And for Director Nungu, what steps should be taken to realize that startups do get tax breaks? Just a brief information to add there. We as TSA, we formally have engaged Minister of Finance on that, and we are also formally have engaged Tanzania Revenue Authority, TRA, on how and the best measures startups can get tax break. But yeah, to you.
Thank you. At least TSA have already answered the first question, that it is a work in progress, and the report has a lot of recommendations, which I mean, the government will work together to see how best to implement them. Some of them, I mean, incremental. Yeah, but then I will quickly touch, I mean, the previous note from Salaam that, I mean, COSTECH, or, I mean, the government does not put policies to every innovation. But when there is innovation in a new area where we don't have any policy, COSTECH has a role to advise the government. That's why, I mean, COSTECH can work hand in hand to the regulator of that particular sector and say, can we have a waiver here? Can we have wait and see? That's why today TCRI is giving 3 months, I mean, resources free, and it can be renewed when there is a case. So that was one. Then the second question was the startup founders meeting. Then as a whole, I would say, let us, the end of May, choose a date, we discuss, we meet. Then from there we can make it regular as we see fit. But starting with May, please, we are available.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what he meant by his question. I assume he meant sectors, because by market, we usually refer to geographies, countries, you know. But if you meant sectors, I would probably say I can pick 5 where I think there's a sizable opportunity in Tanzania, or 6 rather. So one is fintech, or financial services for that matter. We all know fintech, as we speak now, accounts for more than 1/3 of all investments in Africa for startups. Next step, I think, is the next sector. I'll pick agri-tech, or agricultural sector again. I think it's a no-brainer for Tanzania. It's an area that I think needs a lot of solutions that startups needs to work on. I usually don't fancy new startups coming up with very hypothetical ideas and hypothetical solutions, while we have real problems on the ground that require real solutions, and we are here to innovate to address these solutions. Just one thing, imagine. Today, I think 85% of all smallholder farmers in Tanzania own between 0.5 to 2.5 acres of land, which of course gives you a lot of low productivity, low income, and then they keep on remaining poor and poor. Those are the things that we need to probably address as startups. Next, I think, is healthcare. Next to that, probably I'll pick education. I think we need to do a lot for the education system in Tanzania. And then, of course, transportation, logistics, and lastly, probably I'll pick retail and the consumer goods. Those are the areas which have huge opportunity, and those are the areas probably majority of investors are looking to deploy their money into.
Thank you. You have, yes, Kari, we have a further question?
Yes, I have one last question in interest of time, I know, to Ms. Zwena. And my question is issue around working places, because we know that for startups to be able to do their work properly, they need the areas where maybe they can work from. For those who are into ICT, they will need a place with stable internet. They will need, and normally our ecosystem have developed things like what we call co-working spaces, innovation hubs, and I know she owns one. I think I want to address a question to her. What steps does she think should be taken to make sure there are more available places where startups can work from, or can use them as a place where to test the ideas, create their products, because some of the startups do have hardware products, I would say. So, and there are very limited areas where one can go and try to create something. Fabrication labs, for example. So what do you think should be done to address that?
Thank you, Zahor. There are various areas, but I'll touch on a few that I believe that are important. Number one is that for existing spaces, particularly innovation hubs, that are either funded or supported by a program or let's say a donor-funded program and so forth. Those specifically need to look at 2 things. One is the capacity of the startup itself. Goes back to Salaam's point of screening the startups that you're onboarding. Because when you're onboarding a startup that has potential, that is the one that will graduate and sit with you and co-work or rent the space in your co-working area. That is revenue that is regenerated for you to further expand and so forth. So that is number one in terms of the quality of the startups that are screened to bring on board into your co-working space or innovation hub. The other aspect is culture, which is also has been touched on the report itself. I think the culture of understanding that a startup has to have an office or has to have a space that is fully dedicated for themselves. We need to move past that. A co-working space that offers basic membership or a dedicated desk is more than enough for you to have a shared address with other startups, and this could even be for post-revenue startups that maybe their base station is in Iringa, but they're in Dar es Salaam just for the address purposes and stakeholder management aspects. So what can we do? One is change of understanding that where startups operate from. Then again, it all comes down to one single thing, is our definition of who a startup is and what is the classification of a startup. But other outside that, I believe innovation hubs and existing spaces need to invest more on co-working spaces rather than just incubation and acceleration specifically. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that was a great panel. I hope you do agree. May you please clap for the discussants. And yourselves, so you may clap again, for being a great audience. And it's been an honor to moderate this session. We're coming to an end, and just before we finish, I would like to hear parting words, mainly touching on the way forward after this policy from the discussants. And alongside that, there was a question that we did not get to respond to around sustainability and growth. And so as you're giving your parting words, it's only right that we also speak about the sustainability and growth of startups, because ultimately, without startups, we actually don't need a startup policy. So at the heart of this policy, we need to have thriving, growing, upcoming, post-revenue startups in the market. On that note, nawashukuru sana tena, asanteni kwa usikivu wenu, na nitawaga rasmi wakitoa way forward. Kwa sasa hivi nitaanza na Zuena.
Thanks, Soraya. I think my parting words goes to, I would say, someone that speaks for us, which is Tanzania Startup Association, but also the ministries. And one of the ministries represented here, but others, and I believe TSA would be able to speak on behalf of us. One thing I want to say is that formalization shouldn't be a process. And when I say it shouldn't be a process, it's not just about time, which the ambassador has mentioned, or the ease of starting a business or registering a business, but particularly every aspect that includes for us to be accounted for as a taxpayer, a startup to be considered a taxpayer shouldn't be a process. One of the things that I strongly believe that needs to be communicated is that we speak about tax breaks, we speak about incentives, and though some might question and say that, so if we do that, where's the revenue for the government? It does not necessarily mean that. It only means, I strongly believe that if these incentives are put in place, you're only widening the tax base. And that is a plus for the government itself, but also formalizing a startup and getting them into the habit of understanding that having a startup or having a business is a process in itself, and it needs to start from day one. So that is one of the things that I would want to communicate. Lastly, this is for everyone in the room. This is more of follow through. Initially, when I started speaking, I had mentioned that the means for dialogues are many. However, we lack at implementation, and I believe that we cannot move forward as individuals. We need to move forward together if we want to see this through. So follow through is very important. I'll use an analogy of a marathoner. There are many marathoners in a marathon, right? There are those that are there to compete, and there are those that are there to complete. At the stage that we are here to complete the stage. We're not here to compete. We're not here to surpass other countries, other neighboring countries. We need to move past the stage where we are comfortable and we see that it is a conducive environment for the startups, for the entrepreneurs, and everybody in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Zuena. Salaam, karibu.
Asante. So I think two things. One, my advice to TSA in the whole, I think for me, the immediate steps that we need to take is one, I think we need to find a way to put regulators in one room and tell them about these things that we're talking about here. Because at the end of the day, they cannot regulate what they don't understand. So put CMSA, TRA, BOT, put them all in one room and then let them understand about the dynamics of startups. Startups today, this $3 trillion economy. So teach them what they need to know before you move to the next step. So by the time you ask them to make changes in their policies to accommodate the startup policy, it will be easier for you to do that. But the next thing I think is from the report, I read the whole report, and I saw there are areas which probably we can start working on even before the policy. So for me, I think they are low-hanging fruits. So we can pick those and start working on those while, working for the policy in the long term. And lastly, so for the policy, unfortunately, it wasn't all covered in the report. When you're building a startup ecosystem, there are 8 aspects that we need to cover, and these are my parting words. So the 8 aspects are: 1 is the policy itself, 2nd is finance, 3rd is the culture, the mindset, such things. 4th is the human capital and talent. Actually, last year, 73% of all startups that raised money in Africa were educated outside African continent. So that tells you about the lack of talent in the market. Then hubs, how can we empower hubs and make them more sustainable? What more revenue sources can they have so they can support more startups? Next is development partners. We can leverage on their resources and their international experience to support the ecosystem. Thanks to the Dutch for supporting initiatives like this one. So we can leverage on the donors' support to see what role can they. Actually, one of the things people don't understand is before anybody supported the startup, I think donors were the first in Tanzanian market to support innovators and startups, which I think is a good thing. Next is the research and academia. What sort of research programs do we have can provide real-time solutions for the market as long as the academia? What sort of skills are we building into the graduates that they can deploy in the business which they're building in the today's world? And lastly, I think is the markets. So how can we provide more markets for startups? So for the solutions and the services that they're building, who are they selling to? How can we support to make sure that they have markets which will respond to your initial question of sustainability moving forward? Thank you.
My parting words, it will start with a call to all the startups or the innovators, because the question was about the survival. Survival also sometimes is the market, but also the idea itself. Was it ready for the market? So sometimes I've seen cases where graduates, from the engineering and the technology-related programs, they have their final year projects. When they graduate, they assume that is a business idea, so they want to go to the market and they want the government to support it. So that's where, so it is TSCA to increase that awareness. So it is a joint work from the government side, from the industry. The report said, we should start from the university level, entrepreneurship. So that I said, the innovators, so being also entrepreneurs. But we're working with the TSCA because something is lacking still. That's why I said, at COSTECH, we have 12 weeks for the ideation, testing the idea before we go now to start having the company registered as now a startup, because the idea can fail or the market can reject it. But someone coming from the university and saying, this is my final year project, is a project or is a product or a service, then I need money. Yeah, then the government is not giving him and not supporting. So there is still something is lacking. But there was, something here that TSCA should kind of, have the regulators in one room. And I think that one, COSTECH was also planning a similar meeting. So maybe we could look into the Innovation Week, which is, next month, see if we can have that side event, if it's not too soon. Yeah, I think that's when it can be, still this report is still hot. We can also try to engage them, because last year during the Innovation Week, we engaged them on another angle from the Global Innovation Index, point of view, what are the roles for each and every one. So we can have a similar session this year regarding now the startup ecosystem in general. And that one COSTECH will be glad to show that and work together. Yeah, otherwise, I hope and trust this report is a good beginning to a well-defined ecosystem where, as Salaam said, soon money can start flowing in. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you all so much. As members and active members of this ecosystem, we would like to welcome you all to Makisatu 2022. It's coming up this May. And I would also like to point out, we have Joseph Manirakiza in the room from Funguo program and UNDP. It's also coming up in May, so I really hope to see you all then. In the meantime, stay well, take care of yourselves, and asanteni sana, kazi iendelee.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are moving first. Round of applause for our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving very close and closer to the launch of our report. Just only two things left on our agenda. But before I say that, I just got a text from my dad, from my father. He's at home and he's watching. I'm very proud. I'll tell you why. One of the biggest challenge of working in startup and entrepreneurship is your family doesn't know what you're doing. I mean, if you have a business and your father and mother really got it what you're doing, that's not a startup, trust me. A startup, it's something you're trying to tell your father that you're trying to, you're trying to create a content so that a kid in Mwanza or somewhere in Burkina Faso can access it and study from it and go do an exam. It doesn't work like that. It's like, what are you saying? What are you talking? Why this, But that's a good thing about innovation. So me, back then, when I was my background is in entrepreneurship. When I was trying to come up with these innovations, ideas, going to my father, telling him like, Dad, I want to do this, this will be like this, look at this product, it's good, nobody has ever done it, I'm the first one to do it. It's like, okay, son, that's good. But when are you getting a job? Is this really a job? Will this make it in life, doing this? I'm like, yeah, Dad, it's entrepreneurship. It's something you should believe in. Took a bit of while, but he eventually got it. And I think him seeing me now here, addressing ambassadors, he'll be like, yeah, he was right. He was right. So yeah, going forward, I want to take time to welcome our another ambassador. His name is Tierman, His Excellency Tierman, who is an ambassador for Netherlands, who deals with youth and works, to give his remarks. So, His Excellency, please welcome.
You almost had it right. Tijmen Rozenboom. No, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Deputy Permanent Secretary. Thank you, Ambassador de Boer. And thank you, distinguished guests and everyone watching online as well. Really happy to be here. So I'm Tijmen Rozenboom, Ambassador for Youth, Education and Work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. For the Netherlands, the specific prospects of young people, mostly within our international cooperation, international trade agenda, is very important. We're of course dealing with a demographic situation in which exactly the case as well here in Tanzania, a very young demographic situation. And these young people are looking for prospects. They're looking for education, they're looking for the right type of skills, they're looking for a job, an opportunity. And very often they have to create their own job, so they become entrepreneur. And we decided that we want to focus within our policy, international policy, very much on these prospects of the young people. And meanwhile, we want to work with them as partners. So we don't just talk about young people, we really want to work and talk with them. So we call that the Youth at Heart strategy that we have. So I'm actually now here visiting. Normally I'm in The Hague or elsewhere, but now I'm visiting your amazing country to actually see some of the initiatives that the embassy has and that are happening here with regards to young entrepreneurs. And it is really special to see. I've seen already some young agripreneurs or people working on all different, whether it's working on a cleaning company or chickens. We've seen everything, and I've really noticed the tremendous energy and tremendous ideas and perseverance of a lot of the young people who are setting up a business here. Specifically, I have to say, the tremendous energy also of the young women who are becoming entrepreneurs and who sometimes have facing an extra barrier to get there, but who nonetheless are very often making it, very often actually achieving. So I was very much impressed with that. So here, becoming entrepreneur, as we've already said and we've heard, of course, in this panel and in the report, it's a huge opportunity. It's a way to actually be able to create jobs, but of course there's also challenges. And talking the last couple of days, talking to a lot of those young entrepreneurs, I heard a lot of those challenges as well. And I think in the report also tackles a few of them, or a lot of them. What I've heard as well, it's about skills. Sometimes a lot of these young entrepreneurs and the young people that I spoke to felt that their skill set didn't really prepare them to become an entrepreneur. And yes, we're talking about maybe technical skills or entrepreneurial skills, but this is also, of course, about these very famous 21st century skills. Creative thinking, being able to cooperate, be critically thinking, out of the box. These are things that are super essential when you want to become an entrepreneur. So that means also that university educations need to also adapt to that skill set. Another challenge that I've heard and that I've also read, and that was also in the panel specifically mentioned, of course, access to finance. And of course the issue of unfavorable regulations and sometimes taxes that actually makes it harder to start, grow, and scale an innovative business. So that's why today is so important, right? To actually work on a regulatory situation or a startup act that could potentially do the trick or could help do the trick. To increase incentives to start and for investors actually to invest in promising companies. And this means working on an ecosystem. The study gives very clear recommendations. So I'm very happy. I was already able to read it, but it hasn't been launched yet, right? But ecosystem also means, and I think that's important to emphasize, it also means giving young people the chance to grow, the space as well to grow, and was also mentioned to fail. Entrepreneurs, they do something new, and specifically working on a startup, it is really something that could potentially be disruptive. It's a word we often hear, but it means that sometimes you're doing something new, something that changes a situation, sometimes that goes perhaps into certain interests, but it is an opportunity. And I think that this ecosystem also means giving young people the skills and the space for this. And I think this is also a matter perhaps well, as our young presenter, I'm really sorry that I forgot your name, you actually mentioned you would hope that there's a culture in which his father already understands what he does, right? That your father understands what you do, and you don't need to first address some ambassadors to get the credit for what you're doing. It should actually be something that people are like, wow, you're doing it. You're actually trying to create something new. You're actually trying to add something. And that would be, and I really hope that we can also, in an integrated ecosystem, try to help nurture that culture and give young people that space. So we need to work, and we've heard that a lot today, we need to work in partnerships. I think it's also in the report, it's mentioned, right, the participatory approach. So with all the players here in the room, but also with young people. This is, as we said, a very a young country, not in the sense that it's a new country, but in the sense that the people are so very young. So we as policymakers, you as policymakers, we need to adapt to that youthful reality. So when working on implementing this important study, when it's not going to, of course, going to gather dust at all, because people are going to work on it, then I think we really need to work bottom up. It has been proven that that is a way of working that is very successful. You need to involve all the actors in the startup and digital innovation sector, and work with them and work with those young entrepreneurs. It's actually these young entrepreneurs who know what the challenges are, who know what the opportunities are, and who are best positioned to advise you all and advise us on how to move forward. So we're very happy that we can contribute to this process of decision making, and we are at your disposal to help it further in partnership with all of you and in partnership with youth. So thank you very much.
Another round of applause to His Excellency. Thank you so much. Now we are closer to what brought us here. I just want to say, after finishing this session within, we'll move outside for another session. It's called lunch, right? Yeah, I think that's a bit more important. So now I want to take this opportunity to welcome our guest of honor, who is the Deputy Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Investment, Industry and Trade, who will come here to give us his speech, but also officially launching the reports. So finally, the moment we've been waiting for, it's here. So ladies and gentlemen, please, round of applause as we welcome our guest of honor, Dr. Herschel.
Mheshimiwa ndugu Paul Makanza, mwenyekiti wa bodi ya wadhamini Tanzania Startup Association, ndugu Zahor Muhaji, mtendaji mkuu Tanzania Startup Association, waheshimiwa mabalozi mliopo, Mheshimiwa Dr. Amos Nungu, mkurugenzi mtendaji COSTECH, ndugu Alfred Mapunda, mkurugenzi wa sera na mipango, Wizara ya Uwekezaji, Viwanda na Biashara, Mheshimiwa Profesa Wangwe, profesa mkongwe, profesa mwenye historia kubwa, profesa unayetusaidia sana kwenye masuala ya sera na hasa kwenye uwekezaji, viwanda na biashara, waheshimiwa wageni waalikwa mliopo hapa na wale ambao mnashiriki kupitia vyombo vyetu vya habari, ndugu wanahabari kwa ujumla, mabibi na mabwana, kwa heshima na taadhima kubwa sana na wasalimu kwa jina la Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania. Na wasalimu kwa jina la Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania. Nilikuwa naisubiri sauti ya Profesa Wangwe. Awali ya yote, kwa heshima na taadhima, tumshukuru sana Mwenyezi Mungu Mwenyezi ambaye amejalia siku ya leo kuwa hapa kwa ajili ya tukio hili adhimu, tukio la uzinduzi wa stadi hii. Ama kwa namna ya kipekee tuwashukuru waandaaji wa hafla hii kwa kumwalika Katibu Mkuu wa Wizara ya Uwekezaji, Viwanda na Biashara, Profesa Kahiarara, ambaye nimesimama mbele yake kumwakilisha katika tukio lenu hili adhimu. Anapenda kuwapongeza na pia kuwashukuru kwa kumwalika, lakini anawaomba radhi, amebanwa na majukumu mengine ya kitaifa, hivyo hakuweza kuwa nanyi leo hii na badala yake nimekuja kumwakilisha. Nina imani udhuru wake mmeupokea na pia mmemwia radhi. Ndugu wageni waalikwa, kwa heshima na taadhima kubwa na kwa namna ya pekee kabisa, kama wizara hatuna budi kuwashukuru wenzetu wa Tanzania Startup Association kwa kuthamini nafasi ya serikali katika maendeleo ya biashara changa na pia kuweza kufanya stadi hii mpaka kufikia leo kuzinduliwa. Niwahakikishie kwamba kwetu sisi hii inatupa nguvu zaidi na kuendelea kushirikiana nanyi ili hatima ya biashara zetu changa iweze kuhakikiwa na kuwezeshwa ili ziendeshwe kwa uhuru zaidi, zikue na kuchangia ipasavyo katika kutoa ajira na kuchagiza uchumi wa taifa letu. Na hayo yameelezwa pamoja na mwezeshaji Profesa, na hayo pia yameonekana katika ripoti ile ambayo leo hii itakwenda kuzinduliwa rasmi. Ndugu wageni waalikwa, nipende kuchukua nafasi hii kuhakikishia kuwa serikali yenu sikivu ya awamu ya 6 ambayo inaongozwa chini ya uongozi wake Mheshimiwa Samia Suluhu Hassan imedhamiria kwa dhati kabisa kuweka mazingira bora na wezeshi ya kibiashara, sio tu kwa kampuni makubwa na biashara kongwe, lakini pia kwa biashara ndogo, za kati na changa zinazoanza, ili ziweze kuwa na ubunifu zaidi na ziweze kuweka tija kubwa katika uchumi wa biashara wa nchi yetu. Mtakumbuka kwamba mwaka jana tarehe 15 mwezi wa 6, Mheshimiwa Samia Suluhu Hassan alipokuwa akiwahutumia vijana wa Tanzania alisema na kuahidi kuwapa ushirikiano vijana wajasiriamali na wabunifu. Ushirikiano huo aliahidi kuwapa kupitia umoja wenu wa TSA. Nasi kama wizara inayosimamia shughuli za uwekezaji, viwanda na biashara, tunao wajibu wa kutafsiri tamko hilo la Mheshimiwa Rais kwa vitendo, na ndio maana tumeamua kushirikiana na TSA kuweka misingi ya mazingira bora, misingi ya mazingira rafiki na wezeshi kwa biashara changa, hasa za wajasiriamali vijana, ziweze kuanzishwa na kustawi ndani ya jamii yetu ya Tanzania. Mengi yameulizwa kwamba nini kinafuata baada ya uzinduzi wa ripoti hii? Nini kitafuata baada ya leo kuzinduliwa ripoti hii? Kwa niaba ya wizara niwahakikishie zile findings zilizoonyeshwa, zile recommendations zilizotolewa na profesa mahiri ndani ya stadi hii zinachukuliwa kwa uzito mkubwa na zinaenda kutekelezwa kwa uzito na kwa haja inayostahili. Ndugu wageni waalikwa, mchakato wa taarifa inayozinduliwa leo hii ulianza baada ya kikao kazi cha pamoja baina ya serikali na sekta binafsi. Na kikao hii, kwa wale wanakumbuka, kilifanyika mwezi Februari mwaka 2021. Na kikao hii Kikao hicho kiliongozwa na Mheshimiwa Waziri Mkuu wa Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania kwa upande wa serikali, lakini pia TPSF walikuwa kwa upande wa pili wa sekta binafsi. Pamoja na mambo mengine, katika kikao hicho changamoto zinazolikabili kundi la biashara changa zilijadiliwa, ambapo serikali iliridhia ufanyike utafiti wa kitaalamu ili kuweza kubaini, kupata ushahidi, kupata uzoefu wa nchi jirani, namna bora ya kuziwezesha biashara hizo kuanzishwa na kusimamiwa ili zikue na mwisho zilete matunda tarajiwa kwa taifa letu. Kipekee kabisa ni shukuru timu ya wataalamu iliyofanya study hii, kwani imetuletea best practices ambazo zimeonekana kutoka mataifa mbalimbali. Kwa hakika kikao kile kilichoongozwa na Mheshimiwa Waziri Mkuu mmekitendea haki, na kwa hakika ripoti hii itatufungua macho zaidi na kuonyesha ni mambo gani sasa tunaweza tukajifunza kutoka kwenye hizo nchi ambazo mmezirejea. Ndugu washiriki, shughuli ya utafiti ilifanywa na taasisi ya ESRF kama ambavyo imeelezwa hapo awali, na hiyo ilifanywa kwa ufadhili mkubwa wa serikali ya Uholanzi kupitia ubalozi wao hapa nchini. Hivyo nichukue nafasi hii pekee kuwashukuru sana serikali ya Uholanzi kupitia ubalozi wao hapa nchini kwa kujitoa kwao kufanikisha swala hili muhimu kwa maendeleo ya shughuli za uwekezaji, viwanda na biashara. Aidha, ni wapongezi wataalamu wabobezi kwa kazi nzuri iliyowezesha kukamilika kwa utafiti huo ambao ndio sababu kubwa yetu sote iliyotukutanisha leo hii mahala hapa. Ndugu wageni waalikwa, ni tumaini letu kwamba taarifa hiyo itawekwa bayana kama ambavyo tayari imeshaelezwa changamoto za biashara changa, ili wote tuzitambue na kwa pamoja tutafute mbinu bora za kuzikabili na kuzitafutia solutions zake kwa maendeleo ya jasiriamali na maendeleo ya uchumi wa taifa letu kwa ujumla. Hivyo basi, taarifa hiyo itasaidia sio tu serikali kubuni mikakati stahiki itakayoweka mazingira wezeshi ya kibiashara nchini, isipokuwa itasaidia sekta zote za kiuchumi katika jamii yetu na taifa letu kwa ujumla. Ni matumaini yetu kama wizara kwamba mapendekezo ya taarifa hiyo yatajenga msingi na kuchochea mabadiliko ya kisera. Kama ambavyo profesa ameshasema, baadhi ya sera zimechelewa. Huenda zilichelewa kwa sababu kila kitu kina sababu. Kuchelewa kwake huenda ilikuwa kuyapata sasa maoni ambayo yametokana na study hii yaingizwe, michakato yake ikamilike ili kazi iendelee. Na maboresho yatafanyika sio tu kwenye sera, bali pia yataenda mbali zaidi kwenye kanuni na kwenye sheria zinazoshughulika na ustawi wa biashara ndogo na viwanda vidogo, na hasa zile changa kabisa. Ni imani yetu kwamba sera yetu ya maendeleo ya biashara na ile sera ya biashara ndogo na viwanda vidogo ambayo ipo hatua za mwishoni kabisa zitaweza kuchukua recommendations zilizopo kwenye study hii. Nimalizie kwa kurudia kuwashukuru sana TSA, hasa mwenyekiti wake, baraza la wadhamini wa TSA, serikali ya Uholanzi, ESRF kwa ujumla wao na washikadau wengine wote katika kufanikisha utafiti uliozaa taarifa hii muhimu kwa taifa letu. Mwisho kabisa, ni washukuru wadau wote mliotenga muda wenu, wale ambao mpo hapa na wale ambao mnatufuatilia kupitia mitandao, kwani uwepo wenu ni dhahir mmeonyesha kuunga mkono jambo hili, lakini si tu kuunga mkono jambo hili, bali pia kuunga mkono jitihada za serikali ya awamu ya 6 ambazo zinalenga kuweka mazingira wezeshi ya biashara, ufanyaji biashara, viwanda na uwekezaji kwa ujumla wake. Baada ya kuyasema hayo, kwa heshima na taadhima, sasa niko tayari kuizindua ripoti yetu husika. Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania.
Sasa ningependa kuwaita our Vice Chairperson Madam Lulu Mwanakilala and His Excellency Ambassador Wiebe Debor, also His Excellency Ambassador Tiemen, for officially launching this. Caroline, where are you? Please, please come. You need to handle this. This was agreed. Okay. So if they cut the ribbon, it will be officially launched, and right away you'll get this report in your emails. And we have some very few hard copies here. We'll give very few people. We're not trying to print so much to save the trees. You know, climate change, you know, guys? Because papers are made by trees. So you cut trees to make paper. And it's very bad for environment. So we try to go digital, right? We cool, eh? Okay. Caroline, go ahead. Thank you all. Another round of applause for team here. Okay, I think you can, wait, Lulu. Sorry. I think you can stand here to take some photos. Official photos. Official ones. Yeah, camera. Official photos with your reports. Actually, it's an excuse for me to be in. Wait. The panel, please come and we take a photo with our guests of honors. So these guys, the panelists are taking photos on behalf of all of you, but on a lunch everybody will be individually, right? Okay. Okay, Professor Wangwe for ESRF. Thank you so much. So before we head to lunch outside, everything is set. I want to say a few words. First of all, our ecosystem did not fall from the sky. This small startup and entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem had its own pioneers, people who sweat, cried, and worked harder to make sure we are here today. And so I would love to just recognize the presence of our one of the very, very original founders of this ecosystem as a whole, Dr. Hassan Mshinda, wherever you are. Recently, on our AGM, annual general meeting, we did award him with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution in science, innovation, research, and technology in Tanzania. One of the brightest and a very humble world-class scientist we have in the country. So a round of applause again for Dr. Hassan Mshinda. So with that, before we head to lunch, I want to take this chance to welcome our Vice Chairperson, Madam Lulu Wanakilala, to come to give a vote of thanks. Thank you. Guys, round of applause for my boss. You want me to be fired?
Thank you. It's interesting when you're the last person to speak. I was actually asking Zahoro, is there really a need? Because I think everything has been said. But I'm very happy to be here to represent the board of TSA, but also to represent the founding members of TSA. I see some of them are here. I think Mike is here and Adam is here. Thank you very much. This is a very big moment for us as TSA because this has been in the making for over 2 years now. The idea to come up with a startup policy, but even to come up with the research that would inform the establishment of a startup policy is something that was on board a long time ago. So we're very happy to actually be here at this moment that we actually have a report that has come out that will inform the establishment of a startup policy. And I like what we've heard from Professor Wangwe in terms of the need to actually have a startup policy in Tanzania. So this is validation for us. We're very happy about this. We're also very happy about the partnership that we have had and the support that we continue to have with the government of Tanzania through the Ministry of Investment and Trade, but also with the Netherlands, of course, embassy from the beginning, but also with all the partners that we've been working with very, very closely to get us to this point. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the management of TSA, of course, Zahoro and Pray God and the whole team for a job very well done. We know what it took to get us here, all the work that had to be done behind the scenes. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank absolutely everybody who has made it here today, but who's also been supportive of TSA, the idea behind TSA, the ecosystem, but also being a part of this process and continues to be a part of this process. I would therefore like to thank our development partners. As I said before, I would like to thank the government of Tanzania through the Ministry of Trade and Investment and Trade. I would like to thank all our partners within the ecosystem, COSTECH, Commission for ICT. I also like the idea that in order for TSA to be able to achieve what it needs to achieve, or in order for the ecosystem to be able to get to the goal that we want to achieve, there has to be collaboration and harmony and alignment between what TSA is trying to do and also what the government is trying to do. And therefore, TSA be a part of Tanzania Business Council, but also there has to be harmonization of all the different policies, frameworks, I think bits and pieces that are everywhere to bring together the ecosystem so that we can achieve what we want to achieve. I do not want to take too much of your time. I was only supposed to be here to give a vote of thanks. So I would like to thank everybody who has made it here today and everybody that has been very supportive of TSA. Thank you.
Guys, I know launching of the report was important. The next thing is very important, lunch, right? So I'm not gonna waste time. And for those who are watching us virtually, if you're not fasting, you can just take a cup of water, a glass of water is enough. As we progress to have our lunch, we'll just be there on your behalf. I want to say thank you all. And one last round of applause for ourselves here. Clap. Yeah, so now we can proceed to have lunch. It's just as you get out of the door, there are tables sitting there. It's another chance to network, have a chit chat, exchange network, and contacts, etc. So please, let's go have lunch and let's talk more about ways forward. Thank you. All welcome.